Welcome, weary traveller, to Sleepless Survivors. Tonight, we invite you to drift into the depths of ancient mystery as we explore one of humanity's oldest and most enigmatic tales. The story of the Anunnaki, the sky gods who descended from the heavens. Let your mind wander through the sands of time back to the cradle of civilization, where gods walked among mortals and the boundaries between myth and history blur like mirages in the Mesopotamian desert. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders. Tonight you need not solve any mysteries, you need only listen, and perhaps, in the space between waking and dreaming, you will glimpse something of the truth that ancient peoples once knew. The story begins over 6,000 years ago, in the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent where agriculture was born, where cities first rose from the earth, where writing was invented, and where humanity took its first stumbling steps towards civilization. But according to the ancient Sumerians who lived in this land, they did not accomplish these things alone. They had help, divine help, from beings they called the Anunnaki. The word itself carries weight. Anunnaki. In the Sumerian language, it means those who came from heaven to earth. Anu was the sky god, the supreme deity, and Ki meant earth. The Anunnaki were the children of Anu, divine beings who descended from their celestial realm to shape the destiny of humanity. They were not abstract, distant deities dwelling in some unreachable paradise. They were present, active, involved in the daily affairs of mortals. They built cities, they taught crafts, they established kingship, and according to the myths, they created humanity itself. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort now. Feel the softness beneath you. The Anunnaki story is long, winding through thousands of years of texts and tablets, and we will explore it all together, slowly, gently, as sleep finds you. The earliest mentions of the Anunnaki appear in texts from around 2300 BCE, though the oral traditions that spawned them surely reach back much further. The Sumerians, who occupied southern Mesopotamia, were meticulous record keepers. They pressed their cuneiform script into clay tablets, preserving their myths, their laws, their commercial transactions, their prayers, and within these texts the Anunnaki appear again and again, a pantheon of powerful beings who controlled the forces of nature and determined the fates of kings. In the Sumerian cosmology, the universe began with Namu, the primordial sea, who gave birth to An, the heaven, and Kai, the earth. From their union came Enlil, the god of air, who separated heaven from earth and made room for life to flourish. The Anunnaki were the offspring of these primal forces, numbering in some traditions as many as 50 great gods, or in others, 7 judges of the underworld, or even 600 deities who performed various functions in the cosmic order. The hierarchy of the Anunnaki was complex, reflecting the sophisticated social structures of the Mesopotamian city-states. At the top stood the great gods, the most powerful of the Anunnaki, who decided the great matters of cosmos and humanity. Chief among them was Anu, who dwelt in the highest heaven and rarely descended to earth. Then came Enlil, who ruled the air and the earth, the most active of the supreme gods, the one who spoke with kings and determined which cities would prosper. And there was Enki, also called Ea, the god of water and wisdom, the craftiest of the deities, the one who often intervened on behalf of humanity when the other gods grew angry. Breathe slowly, in and out. The names wash over you like a gentle tide. You need not memorize them. Simply let them carry you deeper into the ancient world. The goddess Ninhursag, also known as Ninmah or Nintu, was the great mother goddess, associated with fertility and childbirth. Ki or Ninhursag was sometimes considered the mother of the Anunnaki themselves. Then there was Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, fierce and passionate, who descended to the underworld and returned. Utu, the sun god who brought justice and light. Nana, the moon god who measured time, and many, many others, each with their own domains, their own temples, their own devotees. These were not mere symbols or metaphors to the ancient Sumerians. The Anunnaki were real as the rivers that watered their fields, as real as the storms that threatened their crops, as real as the kings who ruled their cities. Every Sumerian city had its patron deity from among the Anunnaki. Nippur belonged to Enlil, Eridu to Enki, Uruk to Inanna. The temples of these gods, called ziggurats, were massive stepped pyramids that dominated the skyline, reaching toward the heavens from which the Anunnaki had descended. Let us linger on these ziggurats for a moment. Imagine them in your mind's eye, as you might see them in a dream. Massive structures of sun-baked brick rising in tiers, each level smaller than the one below, creating a stepped effect like a stairway to the heavens. At the very top, a shrine, a sacred space where the deity would descend to meet with the priests. These were not tombs, like the Egyptian pyramids, but bridges between worlds. The very architecture suggested the cosmology, earth reaching up toward heaven, heaven reaching down to earth. The priests who served in these temples were powerful figures in Sumerian society. They were intermediaries between the Anunnaki and humanity. They performed the daily rituals that sustained the cosmic order, washing and clothing the statues of the gods, offering food and drink, burning incense, chanting prayers. They believed that if these rituals were neglected, chaos would ensue. The gods might grow angry and withdraw their protection, and the carefully maintained balance between order and chaos would collapse. Your breathing grows slower now, deeper. The rhythm of ancient chants repeated over millennia echoes softly in the back of your mind. The priests rising before dawn, climbing the ziggurat steps, entering the Holy of Holies where the statue of the god resided, treating it as though the deity itself were physically present. Because according to the myths, the Anunnaki had once been physically present. In the oldest times, the Golden Age, the gods had walked openly among humans. They had founded the first cities before the Great Flood that nearly destroyed the world. 5 cities, according to the Sumerian king list: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. In these antediluvian cities, the Anunnaki had established kingship, teaching humans how to organize society, how to build, how to govern. The kings of these ancient cities were said to have reigned for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years. This has puzzled scholars. Some see it as mythological exaggeration, a way of expressing the vast antiquity of these traditions. Others suggest different calendrical systems, where years might have been measured differently. Still others, in more speculative moods, wonder if there might be some kernel of truth, some memory of a time when things were different, when lifespans were longer, or when time itself was measured differently. But let us not strain ourselves with such questions. Let them float by like clouds across a twilight sky. The ancient stories simply tell us that in those days before the flood, the Anunnaki were present, active, shaping the world. And then came the flood. The Great Deluge appears in Mesopotamian texts centuries before it appears in the Hebrew Bible. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, the Akkadians of Atrahasis, the Babylonians of Utnapishtim. All variations of the same story. A righteous man warned by a friendly god that the other deities had decided to destroy humanity with a great flood. Build a boat, the god whispers. Save yourself, your family, and representatives of all living things. In the most complete version, the Atrahasis epic, we learn why the Anunnaki decided to destroy humanity. It is a strange and haunting reason, one that reveals much about how the ancient Mesopotamians understood their relationship with the divine. According to this text, when the Anunnaki first came to Earth, they had to do all the work themselves. They dug canals, cleared channels, toiled endlessly to make the Earth habitable. The lesser Anunnaki, the Igigi, who performed this labour, eventually rebelled. They were exhausted, resentful. Why should gods toil like slaves? The great gods convened to address the crisis. Enki, the wise god of water and crafts, proposed a solution. Create a new being, a hybrid creature, to take over the labour. This being would be made from clay, the stuff of earth, but mixed with the blood and flesh of a slain god, giving it a divine spark, intelligence, the ability to understand and follow instructions. And so humanity was created not out of love, but out of necessity. Humanity was made to serve the gods, to work the fields and tend the temples, to provide food and drink for the Anunnaki through offerings and sacrifices. Feel your body growing heavier now, sinking deeper. The story unfolds like a scroll, ancient parchment revealing its secrets line by line. For a time, this arrangement worked. Humanity multiplied and flourished, performing the labour that the Igigi had refused. But then a problem arose. Humans became too numerous, too noisy. The texts tell us that the clamour of humanity disturbed the sleep of the gods. Enlil in particular grew increasingly irritated by the constant noise rising from the earth. He could not rest. The din was unbearable. Enlil proposed increasingly severe solutions. First, he sent a plague to reduce human numbers. Enki, who had created humanity and retained a fondness for his creatures, warned his favourite, Atrahasis, how to appease the gods and halt the plague. The human population recovered. Enlil then sent a drought, withholding rain for years, but again Enki intervened with advice and assistance. Each time humanity survived and multiplied again, and the noise returned. Finally Enlil had enough. He convinced the council of the great Anunnaki to send a flood, a complete deluge that would wipe the earth clean of the noisy human infestation. The gods swore an oath not to warn humanity, but Enki, bound by his oath not to speak directly to any human, found a loophole. He spoke to a reed wall of a house, knowing that Atrahasis, who lived in that house, would hear. "Build a boat," he told the wall, "seal it with pitch. Bring aboard your family and representatives of all animals. A flood is coming that will destroy all life." Atrahasis obeyed. He built the boat, stocked it with provisions, brought aboard his family and the animals, and the flood came. The Anunnaki themselves, according to the text, sent the flood, but then cowered in the high heavens, terrified by the destruction they had unleashed. The goddess Ninhursag wept for her human children. The gods, hungry because there were no more humans to provide offerings, clustered around the first sacrifice offered after the flood like flies, desperate for sustenance. When Enlil discovered that some humans had survived, he was furious. But Enki defended his actions, and eventually a compromise was reached. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but would be made less numerous, less fertile, with shorter lifespans, so that the noise would never again grow so unbearable. Death, infant mortality, infertility, these would now limit human population. The Golden Age was over. Humanity would be mortal, brief, struggling, and the Anunnaki would gradually withdraw from direct involvement in human affairs. Let your eyes remain closed. Let the darkness behind your lids deepen, becoming the darkness of the floodwaters, the darkness of the earth covered in water, the darkness from which new life would eventually emerge. After the flood, according to Sumerian tradition, kingship descended from heaven once more. The cities were rebuilt, though now the Anunnaki were less present, less visible. They still determined the fates of kings, still granted authority to rulers, still received worship in their temples, but they no longer walked openly among humans as they once had. The age of direct divine rule had given way to an age of divinely sanctioned human rule. This transition is reflected in the Sumerian king list, that fascinating document that chronicles the reigns of all the kings of Sumer from the beginning of time down to the compiler's present. The list divides history into two eras, before the flood and after the flood. Before the flood, kings reigned for thousands, even tens of thousands of years. After the flood, reigns became shorter, more human in scale, though still often exaggerated. The list presents this as historical fact, a chronicle of real events and real rulers, but to modern readers it reads like mythology, or perhaps like something in between, a mythologized memory of real dynasties inflated to legendary proportions. What were the ancient Sumerians trying to convey with these texts? Did they really believe that their cities had existed for hundreds of thousands of years? That their early kings had lived for millennia? Or were they expressing something more symbolic, a sense of the great weight of tradition, the unfathomable antiquity of their civilization, the connection between their present and a distant divine past? You need not answer these questions. They are not for you tonight. Tonight you simply listen, drifting on the current of the story. The greatest repository of Anunnaki mythology comes from the period after the Sumerians, from the Babylonians who inherited and adapted Sumerian culture. The most famous of these texts is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, which was recited ritually during the New Year festival in Babylon. In this text, the Anunnaki play a supporting role to the new chief deity of the Babylonian pantheon, Marduk. The Enuma Elish tells a story of cosmic conflict and generation. In the beginning, there was only Apsu, the fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt water, primordial beings existing in a state of undifferentiated chaos. From their mingling came the first gods, younger deities who were restless and noisy, disturbing Apsu and Tiamat's rest. Sound familiar? The theme of divine beings disturbed by noise recurs throughout Mesopotamian mythology. perhaps reflecting the urban Mesopotamian experience of noise and crowding, the tension between civilization and peace. Apsu decided to destroy the younger gods, but Ea, the clever one, learned of the plan and killed Apsu first. In Apsu's resting place, Ea established his dwelling, and there fathered Marduk, the mightiest of the gods. But Tiamat, enraged by her consort's death, raised an army of monsters to avenge Apsu and destroy the younger gods. The younger gods, terrified, turned to Marduk for help. Marduk agreed, but demanded that if he defeated Tiamat, he would be made supreme king of the gods. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat is cosmic in scope, a primordial conflict between order and chaos. Marduk trapped Tiamat in a net, drove an evil wind into her mouth, shot an arrow into her belly and split her body in two like a shellfish. From one half of her corpse he made the heavens, from the other half the earth. He established the stars and planets, set the calendar, organised the cosmos. But then arose the question of labour. Who would maintain this newly ordered universe? Marduk proposed a solution. He would create humanity. But this time, humanity would be made not from clay and the blood of a slain god, but specifically from the blood of Kingu, Tiamat's general, the leader of her monstrous army who bore responsibility for the war. King was executed, and from his blood, humanity was fashioned. The text is explicit about humanity's purpose. Humans were created so that the gods might be at leisure. We were made to serve, to work, to provide for the Anunnaki through cultivation and worship. And in gratitude for Marduk's victory in this solution, the Anunnaki built him a great temple in Babylon, the Asagala, and a towering ziggurat, the Etemenanki, whose name means House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. This ziggurat, 7 tiers high, each level painted a different colour, may be the historical basis for the biblical Tower of Babel, though that is another story for another night. Your thoughts are becoming dreamlike now, images blending and flowing into one another, gods and monsters, creation and destruction, the eternal cycle of order arising from chaos only to collapse back into chaos again. In the Enuma Elish, the Anunnaki appear as a collective body, a divine council that witnesses Marduk's victory and acclaims him as king. They number 50, according to this text, the great gods who decree the fates. But in other texts, the Anunnaki take on different roles, sometimes serving as judges in the underworld, determining the fate of the dead, sometimes appearing as lesser divine beings who perform specific functions in the cosmos. This multiplicity of roles has led to much scholarly debate about who exactly the Anunnaki were in Mesopotamian thought. Were they a specific group of deities, or a general term for all the gods? Were they distinct from other divine groups mentioned in the texts, such as the Igigi, or were these simply different names for the same beings? The texts themselves do not provide clear, consistent answers. Mythology is not systematic theology. It is fluid, adaptive, reflecting the needs and understandings of different times and places. What is consistent across the texts is that the Anunnaki were powerful, numerous, and intimately connected with the administration of both the cosmos and human civilization. They were not abstract principles but personalities, with desires, conflicts, alliances, and enmities. They loved and hated, created and destroyed, helped and hindered. They were in a sense like humans, but vastly more powerful, immortal, and free from the limitations of physical form, though they could take physical form when they wished. The relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity was primarily one of master and servant, but it was not entirely without affection. Various texts speak of certain gods who cared for humanity, who protected favoured individuals or cities, who taught useful skills. Enki, in particular, is consistently portrayed as humanity's friend and advocate, the one who warns of disasters, who provides wisdom and knowledge, who intervenes when the other gods would destroy their creation. There is a poignant text, the poem known as the Eridu Genesis, which survives only in fragments, that tells the story of creation and the flood from a slightly different angle. In this text, Nintur, the birth goddess, is involved in the creation of humanity, fashioning humans like a potter works clay. The text describes the early days when cities did not yet exist, when humans were like animals, and how the Anunnaki established the first cities and kingship to organise human society. It tells how Enlil grew disturbed by human noise and sent the flood, and how Ziusudra, a pious king, was warned by his patron deity and survived by building a boat. What is touching in this version is the aftermath. After the flood, Ziusudra offers sacrifices to Anu and Enlil, and these gods are so moved by his devotion and so regretful of having nearly destroyed humanity that they grant Ziusudra immortality and transport him to Dilmun, a paradisiacal land, to live forever. It is a rare happy ending in Mesopotamian mythology, a moment of divine mercy and human apotheosis, a crossing of the boundary between mortal and immortal. Breathe in the stillness of that moment, the floodwaters receding, the boat grounding on a mountaintop, the doors opening to a world washed clean, the terrified gods peering down from heaven, relieved that they had not, after all, extinguished the flames of human life. The smell of sacrifice rising, pleasing, promising that the cosmic order would continue, that the temples would be tended, that the gods would not go hungry. The theme of humans achieving divinity appears elsewhere in Mesopotamian myth, though it is rare. Utnapishtim, the Babylonian flood hero, is likewise granted immortality and dwells at the ends of the earth. When the hero Gilgamesh, greatest of mortal kings, seeks to overcome death, he journeys to find Utnapishtim, hoping to learn the secret of eternal life. But Utnapishtim tells him there is no secret, only a unique circumstance, a one-time divine decision that will never be repeated. Death is humanity's lot. The Anunnaki, when they created humans, kept immortality for themselves and decreed that humans must die. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the most famous piece of Mesopotamian literature, but the Anunnaki appear in it only peripherally, in the background, as the powers who set the boundaries of human existence. Gilgamesh is 2/3 god and 1/3 human, born of a divine mother and a mortal father, yet even he cannot escape death. His great journey, his adventures, his grief over the death of his friend Enkidu, his desperate quest for immortality, all end in acceptance. He returns to Uruk, his city, and finds meaning not in eternal life but in lasting achievement. The great walls he built, the civilization he fostered, the name he will leave behind. The Anunnaki hover over this story as they hover over all human stories in Mesopotamian thought. They set the rules. They determine the structure within which human life unfolds. They are not cruel, not particularly, though they can be harsh. They are simply doing what they must to maintain cosmic order, and humanity's place in that order is fixed. We are mortal, we are labourers, we are worshippers, and yet within those constraints the myths suggest there is room for heroism, for love, for wisdom, for creating things of lasting value. Let yourself relax more completely now. Feel the tension draining from your neck, your shoulders, your back. The ancient stories wash over you like waves on a shore, endlessly repeating, endlessly soothing. The Anunnaki myths profoundly shaped Mesopotamian religion and society for thousands of years. Every aspect of life was understood in relation to these divine beings. Natural disasters were interpreted as expressions of divine anger. Military victories and defeats were signs of divine favour or disfavour. The king ruled not by his own authority, but as the chosen representative of the gods, particularly of the city's patron deity. When a new king came to power, he would undergo rituals of divine investiture, travelling to the temple of Enlil in Nippur to receive the symbols of kingship from the hands of the god's priests. Law codes, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, were presented as gifts from the gods, revealed to the king so that he might govern justly. At the top of the stele on which Hammurabi's laws are inscribed, there is a relief carving showing the king standing before the sun god Shamash, receiving the rod and ring, symbols of divine justice and authority. The message is clear. These laws are not merely human inventions, but reflect the cosmic order established by the Anunnaki. Agriculture, the foundation of Mesopotamian civilization, was understood as a gift from the gods and dependent on their continued favour. The flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, essential for irrigating crops, came from the gods. Droughts and locusts were divine punishments. Every stage of the agricultural cycle was accompanied by rituals, prayers, offerings, seeking to ensure divine blessing and avert divine wrath. Even individual life passages were mediated by the Anunnaki. Birth was overseen by Nintu or Ninhursag, the mother goddess. Marriage invoked Inanna, goddess of love. Illness might be the work of malevolent spirits or divine punishment, and healing required the intervention of divine powers, sought through prayers, incantations, and offerings to deities like Ninisina or Gula, goddesses of healing. Death brought one into the realm of the underworld deities, the Anunnaki judges who determined the fate of the deceased. This pervasive divine presence meant that ancient Mesopotamians lived in a world thick with supernatural beings. The Anunnaki were only the most powerful tier of a complex hierarchy that included lesser gods, demons, spirits, ghosts, and other entities. Magic and divination were essential technologies for navigating this populated cosmos, ways of determining divine will, appeasing angry deities, warding off malevolent spirits, and ensuring one's actions aligned with the cosmic order. Your breathing is so slow now, so deep. Each breath carries you further from the concerns of your world, deeper into the ancient past where the boundaries between the material and spiritual were permeable, where gods were present and active, where the universe was alive with intention and meaning. Divination took many forms in Mesopotamia. Priests examined the entrails of sacrificed animals, reading divine messages in the configuration of organs. They observed the flights of birds, the patterns of oil on water, the behaviour of smoke from incense. Dreams were particularly important as vehicles of divine communication, and dream interpretation was a highly developed art. The king would sleep in temples, hoping to receive dreams from the Anunnaki, guidance for important decisions of state. One of the most sophisticated forms of divination was astrology. The movements of celestial bodies, the sun, moon, planets, and stars were understood as a form of divine writing, the gods communicating their intentions through the heavens. Mesopotamian priest astronomers kept detailed records of celestial phenomena, developing mathematical models to predict planetary movements, eclipses, and other events. This was not astronomy in the modern sense, dispassionate observation of mechanical celestial bodies, but a form of reading divine intent. The heavens were the realm from which the Anunnaki had descended, and celestial movements revealed their plans. This Mesopotamian astrology would eventually spread throughout the ancient world, influencing Greek, Roman, Indian, and eventually medieval European astrology. The zodiac, the division of the sky into 12 signs, the association of planets with gods and specific influences, the elaborate interpretive systems, all of this traces back to Mesopotamian attempts to communicate with and understand the Anunnaki. The ziggurat was itself a kind of astrological instrument, a link between earth and heaven, a place where the priest could ascend literally and symbolically to draw closer to the celestial realm of the gods. At certain times, particularly during festivals, the deity was believed to descend to the temple at the ziggurat's summit, making themselves present in a special way, accessible to the priests who served them. The greatest of these festivals was the New Year, the Akitu festival in Babylonian times, celebrated in the spring when the agricultural year began. This festival lasted 12 days and involved elaborate rituals reenacting the creation of the world as told in the Enuma Elish. The king played a central role, ritually humbled before Marduk, symbolically dying and being reborn, renewing his divine mandate to rule. The statue of Marduk was paraded through the city, visiting other gods, reenacting Marduk's victory over chaos and establishment of cosmic order. These were not mere pageants, but powerful rituals that, in the Mesopotamian understanding, actually renewed and maintained the structure of reality itself. Imagine the streets of ancient Babylon during the Akitu festival. Thousands of people lining the processional way, that great avenue decorated with glazed blue tiles and reliefs of lions sacred to Ishtar. The priest carrying the statue of Marduk on a portable shrine, chanting, music, incense. The city in a state of sacred celebration, the boundary between the human and divine temporarily thinned, the presence of the Anunnaki more palpable than usual. For those days the gods were not distant but near, participating in the life of the city, blessing it for another year. Your mind drifts through those ancient streets now, not as a participant but as a ghost, an invisible observer, watching the pageantry, hearing the hymns in a language long dead, seeing faces that turned to dust thousands of years ago, but who, in their moment, believed profoundly in what they were doing, believed that their rituals upheld the world. As Mesopotamian civilization evolved through the centuries, from Sumerian to Akkadian to Babylonian to Assyrian, the Anunnaki myths evolved as well. Different cities emphasized different deities. Political changes were reflected in theological changes. When Babylon rose to dominance, Marduk, originally a relatively minor deity, was elevated to kingship over the gods, and older creation myths were rewritten to place him at the centre. When Assyria dominated, Ashur, the Assyrian national god, took on attributes and roles previously assigned to other members of the Anunnaki. Yet the fundamental structure remained remarkably stable. The gods lived in heaven. They had created humanity for service. They required worship and offerings. They intervened in human affairs, choosing kings, determining fates, sending blessings and curses, and they would, eventually, judge each soul after death. The Mesopotamian underworld, called Kur or Irkala, was a grim place in the mythology, a land of dust and darkness from which there was ordinarily no return. The Anunnaki of the underworld, particularly the 7 judges called the Anunnaki of the netherworld, determined the fate of each soul that entered their realm. Unlike later religions that developed elaborate theologies of reward and punishment in the afterlife, Mesopotamian religion offered little hope for the dead. Rich and poor, righteous and wicked, all went to the same shadowy realm, a kind of half-existence, sustained only by the offerings brought by the living. This rather bleak view of the afterlife may explain the Mesopotamian focus on achieving something lasting in life, since death offered little hope. Meaning had to be found in earthly accomplishments, in leaving a name, in building something that would endure, in serving the gods faithfully and perhaps earning their favour in this life, if not the next. Yet there are hints, in some texts, of beliefs in resurrection, or return from death, at least for certain favoured individuals or under certain circumstances. The myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld and her eventual return suggests that the boundary between life and death was not absolutely impermeable. But these are exceptional cases, divine mysteries, not the common lot of humanity. Feel yourself sinking deeper still, as if descending through layers of earth and time, moving from the bright world of temples and cities down into darker, older strata of belief and myth. Beneath the high theology of the state religion, there existed popular religion, the beliefs and practices of common people, which left fewer written records but which we can glimpse through certain texts. Ordinary Mesopotamians wore amulets and recited incantations for protection. They feared demons more than they feared the Anunnaki, those great distant gods. Demons caused illness, bad luck, nightmares, and had to be warded off with magic. Each person had a personal god, a lesser deity who served as their advocate before the great gods, their protector and patron. Maintaining a good relationship with one's personal god was essential for a good life. Women in particular had their own religious practices, often centred around household shrines, childbirth rituals and fertility magic. Though excluded from the highest levels of the priestly hierarchy, women served as priestesses in various capacities, particularly in the temples of goddesses like Inanna. In some periods, royal daughters served as high priestesses, most famously Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, who lived around 2300 BCE and who composed beautiful hymns to Inanna that survive to this day, making Enheduanna the first author in history whose name we know. In her hymns, Enheduanna speaks directly to the goddess, praising her power, recounting her myths, and also, movingly, describing her own troubles when she was exiled from her position and praying for Inanna's intervention. The goddess is both cosmic force and personal protector, both the powerful deity of heaven and earth and the one who hears the prayers of a woman in distress. This dual nature, cosmic and intimate, characterizes Mesopotamian religion at its best. The Anunnaki, for all their power and remoteness, were not entirely beyond relationship. They could be approached, petitioned, even bargained with. They had their moods, their preferences, their favourite offerings. A skilled priest or priestess knew how to please them, how to frame a request most effectively, which rituals would be most efficacious for which purpose. The relationship was fundamentally transactional, but not coldly so. There was genuine reverence, genuine awe, and often genuine affection for these divine beings who had shaped the world and continued to sustain it. Let your last conscious thoughts drift away now. The story continues, but you need not actively follow it. Let it become the backdrop to your dreams, the mythic landscape through which your sleeping mind will wander. The fall of the Anunnaki, insofar as there was one, was not a single event but a long, slow process of cultural change and conquest. Mesopotamian civilization endured for over 3,000 years, but it was not static. It was conquered repeatedly by various peoples: Akkadians, Amorites, Kassites, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Persians, Greeks, Romans. Each brought their own religious traditions, their own gods, though many adopted and adapted the Anunnaki myths. The Old Testament, written by Hebrew scribes, shows clear influence from Mesopotamian mythology. The story of Noah's flood is strikingly similar to the earlier Mesopotamian flood myths. The Tower of Babel echoes the ziggurat tradition. Even the creation account in Genesis bears resemblances to Mesopotamian cosmogony, though reimagined as the work of a single god rather than a pantheon. As Judaism developed its strict monotheism, the Anunnaki and other Mesopotamian deities were not so much disproven as redefined. They became, in Jewish interpretation, either false gods, mere idols with no real power, or they were demons, fallen angels, rebellious spirits. The name Anunnaki itself disappears from active religious use, but the myths, transformed and reinterpreted, lived on. When Alexander the Great conquered Mesopotamia in the 4th century BCE, he brought Greek culture and religion. The old temples gradually fell into disuse. The cuneiform script, which had been used for 3,000 years, was forgotten. The last cuneiform text we have dates to the 1st century CE, an astronomical calculation. After that, silence. The tablets crumbled, the cities were buried by sand and time, and the Anunnaki retreated entirely into the realm of forgotten myth. For over 1,800 years, the Anunnaki were lost to human memory. The Bible and classical Greek sources preserved echoes of Mesopotamian civilization, references to Babylon and Assyria, but the details, the myths, the gods themselves were gone. Medieval and early modern scholars knew more about Zeus and Jupiter than about Anu and Enlil. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists began digging in Iraq and Mesopotamia was rediscovered. The great mounds that dotted the landscape turned out to be ruined cities. Excavations at Nineveh, Babylon, and other sites yielded thousands of clay tablets, and scholars painstakingly deciphered cuneiform, unlocking the voices of the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians. The world was astonished. Here was a civilization older than Greece, older than Egypt, with sophisticated literature, law codes, mathematics, astronomy. And here were the myths of the Anunnaki, creation stories, and flood narratives that predated and clearly influenced the Bible. The discoveries fundamentally changed understanding of ancient history and religious development. In academic circles, the Anunnaki took their place in the history of religion, studied as examples of polytheistic belief systems, as precursors to later monotheistic traditions, as reflections of the concerns and worldviews of ancient urban civilizations. Comparative mythology examined how the Anunnaki myths related to those of other cultures. Anthropologists and sociologists explored what these myths revealed about Mesopotamian society, but the Anunnaki were not destined to remain solely in academic discourse. In the late 20th century they found new life in popular culture and alternative history, particularly through the works of authors like Zecharia Sitchin. Beginning in the 1970s, Sitchin published a series of books proposing that the Anunnaki were not mythological beings, but actual extraterrestrial visitors who came to Earth in ancient times. According to Sitchin's interpretation, the Sumerian texts should be read as historical documents describing real events. The Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, which has a long elliptical orbit bringing it into the inner solar system every 3,600 years. They came to Earth seeking gold, which they needed for some purpose on their home planet. They created humans as a slave race by genetically engineering primitive hominids, splicing their own DNA with that of Earth creatures. The great achievements of early civilization, writing, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, were all gifts from these extraterrestrial Anunnaki. Sitchin's theories were rejected entirely by academic scholars, who pointed out his mistranslations of Sumerian texts, his misunderstandings of Mesopotamian cosmology, his lack of actual expertise in ancient languages, and the absence of any archaeological or scientific evidence supporting his claims. There is no planet X called Nibiru on a collision course with Earth. Ancient Mesopotamian astronomy, sophisticated as it was, did not describe such a planet. The Sumerians mined gold, but there is no indication they did so for extraterrestrial overseers. And yet Sitchin's ideas captured imaginations. They offered a narrative that seemed to make ancient myths relevant to a modern, scientifically minded audience. They suggested that humanity's origins were more mysterious and grand than conventional history admitted. They tapped into pre-existing fascinations with ancient astronauts and UFOs, and they gave the Anunnaki a second life as characters in contemporary mythology, appearing in books, television shows, video games, and internet forums devoted to alternative history and conspiracy theories. Your conscious mind need not concern itself with distinguishing myth from history, ancient belief from modern speculation. Let all of it blend together, a river of stories flowing from the distant past through the present and into the future. The Anunnaki forever descending from their heavenly realm, forever shaping and reshaping according to the needs and imaginations of those who contemplate them. In contemporary occult and New Age circles, the Anunnaki have taken on yet other meanings. Some see them as ascended masters, higher dimensional beings who guide human spiritual evolution. Others incorporate them into theories about lost civilizations, ancient high technology, or global conspiracies. Some claim to channel messages from the Anunnaki, receiving guidance or warnings about humanity's future. Others weave them into elaborate cosmologies, combining elements from many different traditions. These contemporary reinterpretations, whatever their relationship to historical truth, serve a similar function to the original myths. They are attempts to make sense of human origins, to place humanity within a larger cosmic context, to explain suffering and limitation, to identify sources of wisdom and knowledge, to warn against hubris, to inspire awe. The details change, the interpretations shift, but the fundamental human needs that generate myth remain constant. And perhaps that is the real legacy of the Anunnaki, not any particular claim about history or cosmology, but the perpetual human impulse to imagine beings greater than ourselves, to seek meaning and origin beyond the material, to tell stories that connect us to the cosmos, to the earth, to the divine, however we conceive it. The ancient Sumerians, pressed against the constraints of mortality and labour, imagined gods who had created them for service, but also given them the gifts of civilization. Medieval Christians, encountering references to these gods in ancient texts, reimagined them as demons or errors. Enlightenment scholars rediscovered them as fascinating examples of ancient belief. Romantic poets saw in them the glory of lost civilizations. Anthropologists studied them to understand human culture. Conspiracy theorists recast them as aliens. New Age practitioners invoke them as spiritual guides. Each generation recreates the Anunnaki in its own image, projects upon them its own concerns, finds in them whatever it is seeking. And in this perpetual recreation, the Anunnaki live on, not as the objective entities the Sumerians believed in, perhaps, but as something equally real, symbols embedded, deep in human consciousness, archetypes of the creative force that shapes worlds, of the authority that structures society, of the mystery that precedes and exceeds human understanding. Sleep comes more easily when we feel connected to something larger than ourselves, when we sense that our small lives participate in great patterns, cosmic dramas, eternal cycles. The Anunnaki myths, in their original form, offered that sense to ancient peoples. They explained where humans came from, why we suffer and die, why we must work, what obligations we have, what we might hope for, and how we fit into the vast structure of reality. They turned the impersonal forces of nature into personalities who could be approached and understood, if not fully controlled. They transformed the terrifying chaos of existence into a cosmos, an ordered universe governed by intelligible, if not always benign powers. We moderns, for all our science and technology, still seek such meaning and connection. We tell ourselves stories about evolution and the Big Bang, about laws of nature and statistical probabilities, and these are powerful stories, well supported by evidence and instrumental in improving our lives. But they do not answer all questions. They do not explain why there is something rather than nothing, why consciousness arises from matter, why we feel that some things matter more than others, why beauty moves us, why we love, why we create, why we wonder at the stars. And so we also tell other stories, myths and metaphors, even when we know they are not literally true, because they gesture toward truths that cannot be captured in scientific language. The Anunnaki, whether understood as real gods, as literary characters, as psychological archetypes, as cultural memories, or as nothing more than stories, gesture toward those deeper truths. They remind us that we did not make ourselves, that we exist within contexts not of our own choosing, that we are subject to powers we cannot control, and that nevertheless we can seek wisdom, create beauty, love one another, and occasionally transcend our limitations. Your breathing is almost imperceptible now, the gentlest tide in and out as sleep rises like water, covering you in its soft darkness. Let us return, as we approach the end of this long night's tale, to where we began. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. It is night there now as well. Thousands of years ago, the stars brilliant in a sky unpolluted by electric light. A priest climbs the ziggurat in Uruk, ascending the 7 tiers to the temple at the summit. He has climbed these steps countless times, performing the rituals that have been performed for centuries, that will be performed for centuries more, until at last the temple crumbles and is forgotten. But he does not know that. In his mind, these rituals are eternal as the gods themselves. He reaches the summit, enters the shrine, approaches the statue of Inanna. In the flickering lamplight, the goddess almost seems alive, her stone eyes gazing beyond him towards something he cannot see. He speaks the words of the ritual in the ancient language. He offers barley and dates, pours out wine, burns aromatic wood. The smoke rises toward the stars, toward heaven, carrying his prayers to the goddess, to the Anunnaki, to the supreme god Anu in his highest heaven. And perhaps, in some way we cannot understand, in some dimension of reality our science has not yet measured, something hears. Perhaps the boundaries between mind and matter, between thought and thing, between story and reality, are not as solid as we imagine. Perhaps the act of imagination, repeated by millions of minds over thousands of years, creates something real, calls something into being. Perhaps the Anunnaki exist not despite being imagined, but because they are imagined, sustained in the collective consciousness of humanity across the generations, as real as anything else we have ever known. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they were never anything more than stone statues and clay tablets, stories told by people who knew nothing of atoms or galaxies, who were wrong about nearly everything, whose worldview was fundamentally mistaken. Perhaps. But in this moment, as sleep takes you at last, does it matter? You're drifting now in that space between waking and dreaming, where all possibilities are equally real and equally imaginary. The priest on his ziggurat and you in your bed are separated by thousands of years and countless miles, yet joined in the simple act of seeking, of reaching towards something greater, of speaking into the darkness and hoping to be heard. The stars wheel overhead as they have wheeled for billions of years, as they will wheel long after human civilization has crumbled to dust like Sumerian tablets. The rivers flow as they have always flowed, carrying silt and life, sometimes gently, sometimes in destroying floods. The earth turns, time passes, empires rise and fall, gods are born and die and are reborn in new forms, and we, brief as sparks from a fire, burn our little moment and then return to the darkness from which we came. But in that moment we tell stories, we imagine gods, we build temples, we write poetry, we love, we wonder, we dream. And in the dreaming we are more than our temporary flesh, more than our contingent lives. We participate, however briefly, in something eternal, something that was true before we were born and will be true after we die, the great mystery at the heart of existence, the question that has no answer except in myth and metaphor and the strange space of dreams. The Anunnaki descended from heaven to earth. They created humanity. They established civilization. They gave knowledge and law. They demanded service and worship. They sent the flood and spared a remnant. They gradually withdrew from active involvement, leaving humanity to find its own way, still present but hidden, still powerful but remote, watching from their celestial thrones as the drama they set in motion continues to unfold, and we, their creation according to the myths, or their creators according to another understanding, or perhaps both at once in some paradox that collapses the distinction between creator and created, we continue that drama. We tell their stories, and in telling them we tell our own. We search for meaning in ancient tablets, in stars, in dreams, in the silence after the story ends and before sleep begins. This is that silence now. The story is told. The Anunnaki have risen and fallen, appeared and disappeared, been remembered and forgotten and remembered again. They are with us still, in whatever way stories are with us, shaping how we understand ourselves and our place in the vast indifferent cosmos that is perhaps not indifferent after all, that is perhaps thick with presences and meanings we are only beginning to sense. Sleep now, Let it all go. The gods will watch over you or they won't, and either way, dawn will come, and with it a new day, new stories, new mysteries, but that is for later. Now there is only the darkness, the silence, the gentle drifting into dreams. The ziggurat stands empty, its stones scattered across the desert, but in memory, in myth, in the dreaming mind, it still reaches toward heaven, and the gods still descend, and the story still unfolds, eternal as the stars, endless as the river, deep as sleep. Rest now, weary traveller. Let the ancient world embrace you. Let the myths carry you into the realm where all things are possible, where gods walk among mortals, where the boundaries dissolve, where you're held in the great pattern, part of the eternal story, safe in the knowledge that you belong, that you matter, that you are home. The Anunnaki watch over you from their distant heaven, or from the depths of the collective unconscious, or from the pages of clay tablets in museum basements, or from nowhere at all, and it makes no difference. They are the story we tell about where we come from, and why we're here, and as long as we tell stories they will endure, rising and falling with the civilizations that dream them, forever descending, forever shaping, forever mysterious, forever the gods who came from heaven to earth. Sleep now. The chronicle is complete, the night is deep, and morning is far away. Let the ancient wisdom of Mesopotamia cradle you in its arms. Let the weight of millennia settle over you like a blanket. Let the voices of the forgotten priests chant you into the dream world, where truth and story are one, where the Anunnaki reign eternal, where you are finally blessedly at rest. Good night, traveller. May your dreams be filled with ancient wonders. May you walk through Babylon's streets, climb Uruk's ziggurat, stand before the gods themselves, and may you wake, when morning comes, refreshed and renewed, carrying with you some fragment of the eternal mystery, some sense of the great story in which we all participate, conscious or not, willing or not. The story that began before history and will continue after history ends. The story of the sky gods and the earthly beings they created. The story of the Anunnaki and the humans who imagine them, forever entwined, forever becoming. The story is told. The night is silent. Sleep claims you at last. And so we close this chapter of the Anunnaki Chronicles, this account of rise and fall, of descent and withdrawal, of creation and destruction, of the eternal dance between divine and human, between story and history, between what was and what we imagine was. From their high heaven, the Anunnaki look down on the world they shaped, the humans they created, the civilizations that rose in their name and then forgot them, only to remember them again in dreams and distant scholarship. They watch, silent now, as they have been silent for millennia, speaking only through the tablets we dig from the ruins, the myths we translate and retell, the questions we still ask about our origins and our place in the cosmos. Were they real, these gods of ancient Sumer? The people who worshipped them thought so. The priests who served them, the kings who claimed their mandate, the farmers who prayed for rain, the women who called on them in childbirth, all believed with a certainty we can hardly imagine that the Anunnaki were real, present, powerful. And now they are stories, but stories have their own kind of reality. They shape how we think, how we imagine, how we construct meaning from the chaos of experience. The Anunnaki story is about creation and service, about divine power and human limitation, about the relationship between those who rule and those who are ruled, about the price of civilization and the burden of consciousness. These themes do not fade. They are as relevant now as they were in ancient Uruk. We still ask where we came from. We still struggle with authority and freedom. We still wonder if there are powers beyond our understanding that shape our fates. We still tell stories to make sense of it all. And so the Anunnaki endure, not as they were originally conceived perhaps, but transformed, adapted, reimagined for each new age, each new generation of dreamers and seekers and storytellers. They are part of our inheritance, part of the long conversation humanity has been having with itself about the nature of reality, divinity and purpose, since we first looked up at the stars and wondered. The Anunnaki Chronicles continue, deeper into the night, deeper into the ancient mysteries that have captivated humanity for millennia. Let us descend further into the layered meanings of these sky gods, exploring the texts that speak of them, the rituals that honoured them, the philosophy that emerged from contemplating them. Breathe slowly, settle more deeply into your resting place. There is so much more to tell, so many tablets yet unread, so many chambers in the great temple of Anunnaki lore yet unexplored. We have all night, all the time in the world, to wander through these ancient halls of knowledge and mystery. Let us return to the creation of humanity, for this is perhaps the most profound and troubling of the Anunnaki myths, the one that speaks most directly to the human condition. The story appears in various forms across different texts and time periods, but certain elements remain consistent. Humanity was not created out of love, not formed as the crown of creation, not made in dignity and freedom. We were created to serve, to labour, to relieve the gods of burdensome work. The most complete account of human creation appears in the Atrahasis epic, which we touched upon earlier, but let us now examine it more closely, for it rewards careful attention. The tablet tells us that when the great gods divided the universe among themselves, Anu took the sky, Enlil the earth and air, and Enki the waters beneath the earth. But someone had to do the actual work of making the earth productive, digging the canals that would allow irrigation, dredging the rivers, building the infrastructure of civilization. This work fell to the Igigi, the lesser gods, who were essentially the working class of the divine realm. For 40 years, the text tells us, they laboured. They carried baskets of earth, they dug channels, they worked without rest. The number 40 is significant in Mesopotamian numerology, representing a long, complete period of time. It is the same 40 that appears in the flood narrative. 40 days and 40 nights of rain, a number suggesting thoroughness, totality, a period that cannot be shortened. At the end of 40 years of ceaseless labour, the Igigi had reached their breaking point. They gathered together and made a fateful decision. They would rebel. In the middle of the night, they surrounded the house of Enlil, the god who had assigned them this labour. They set fire to their tools, they took up arms, they demanded to speak with Enlil. This is a remarkable moment in the mythology. Gods rebelling against other gods, the divine order itself threatened from within. Enlil was terrified. He wept. He contemplated resigning his position, abdicating his responsibilities. A council of the great gods was convened to address the crisis. The Igigi presented their case. They had worked beyond endurance. Their suffering was too great, they could not continue. And the great gods, hearing this testimony, acknowledged its truth. The labour was indeed too much. Something had to change. But what? The work still needed to be done. The cosmic order required it. Civilization could not exist without agriculture, and agriculture required irrigation, and irrigation required constant back-breaking labour. Someone had to do it. If not the gods, then who? And here Enki, clever Enki, wise Enki, friend of humanity, proposed his solution. Let us create a being to bear the yoke. Let us make a Lulu, a primitive worker, who will carry the burden that the gods cannot bear. And so it was decided. Humanity would be created for the explicit purpose of relieving divine suffering by taking on the work the gods themselves could not endure. But how to create such a being? This required divine ingenuity, divine craft. Enki proposed mixing clay with the blood of a slain god, combining the earthly and the divine, creating something between animal and deity, capable of understanding and following instructions, capable of organised labour, but mortal, limited, bound to the earth. The god chosen for sacrifice was Waela, sometimes called Geshtue, identified as the god who had incited the Igigi rebellion. His punishment for this crime would be to die, but his death would also be creative, redemptive even. His blood, containing his divine intelligence and his rebellious spirit, would be mixed with clay by the mother goddess Nintu, and from this mixture humanity would be formed. The text describes the creation with ritualistic precision. Nintu mixed the clay with the blood. She recited incantations. She called upon the great gods to spit upon the mixture, perhaps a way of each god adding something of themselves, or perhaps a magical act, saliva being considered a powerful substance in Mesopotamian magic. And then she divided the mixture into 14 pieces, 7 to become men, 7 to become women, establishing from the very beginning the duality and complementarity of the sexes. These first humans were formed in the womb of the goddess herself, or in some versions in the wombs of 14 birth goddesses, lesser deities who served as divine midwives. For 10 months they gestated, a divine pregnancy, And then they were born into the world, the first human beings, created to work, to serve, to suffer so that the gods might rest. Consider the implications of this origin story as you lie in the darkness. You are descended, according to this myth, from an act of divine desperation, created not as the pinnacle of creation but as a solution to a labour problem. Your mortality, your suffering, your brief and toilsome life, all of this was built into you from the beginning. You have divine blood in you, the blood of the rebel god Wheeler, which gives you intelligence and perhaps a certain rebellious streak of your own, but you're also made of clay, earthbound, destined to return to dust. This is not the comforting mythology of special creation, of humanity as beloved children of a benevolent creator. This is something darker, more honest perhaps, reflecting the actual experience of the Mesopotamian peasant who laboured endlessly in the fields under the burning sun, who gave most of what he produced to the temple and the palace, who lived a hard and short life and knew that his children and his children's children would live the same hard life. The myth makes sense of this suffering by eternalizing it, by declaring that this is simply the human condition, written into the very structure of reality by the gods themselves, and yet there is something else in the myth as well. The divine blood, the intelligence, the fact that we can understand, can think, can question. Wheeler's rebellious spirit lives in us. We are made to serve, yes, but we are also capable of rebellion, of asking why, of dreaming of something different. This tension between our ordained purpose and our divine spark, between our clay nature and our divine blood, is the essential human tragedy and the source of our greatest achievements. Let your mind rest on this paradox. You need not resolve it. Simply hold it, feel its weight, acknowledge the strange dignity it confers. You are clay and divinity mixed, mortal and rebellious, bound and free, servant and questioner. This is what the Anunnaki made when they made you. The Atrahasis epic continues beyond the creation. It tells us that at first humans multiplied slowly. 1,200 years passed, the text says, and then humans became more numerous. Another 1,200 years, and they multiplied further. The numbers are symbolic, suggesting long periods of gradual growth, an age before history, when humanity was still finding its place in the world. But then humanity became too successful. We multiplied too rapidly. We spread across the earth. And most problematic of all, we became noisy. The text repeats this complaint several times. The din of humanity disturbed the gods. They could not sleep. The racket was unbearable. Modern readers sometimes find this complaint puzzling or even comical. The gods want to destroy humanity because we're too loud. But understood in context, the complaint is profound. Noise represents disorder, chaos, the breakdown of cosmic harmony. In the Mesopotamian worldview, the universe was meant to operate in orderly silence, each element in its proper place, each being performing its proper function. The clamour of humanity represented something gone wrong, the creatures exceeding their proper bounds, disturbing the peace that should prevail. Perhaps, too, we can hear in this complaint an echo of real urban experience. The Mesopotamian cities were crowded, noisy places, streets filled with merchants hawking their goods, artisans hammering metal, children playing, animals bleating and lowing, the constant din of human activity. For those with power, those who lived in the quiet precincts of temple and palace, this noise was an irritant, a reminder of the masses of people pressed together in confined spaces. The myth may reflect real class tensions, the irritation of elites with the noisy poor who were supposed to serve quietly, but who insisted on their presence, their needs, their very existence. Whatever the interpretation, Enlil's response was extreme. "Send a plague," he commanded, and the gods obeyed. A devastating epidemic swept through humanity, reducing our numbers dramatically. But Enki, who retained affection for his creation, whispered to his devotee Atrahasis, "Teach the people to stop worshipping all the gods, and focus all their offerings on Namtar, the plague god. Appease him, give him what he wants, and he will withdraw the plague." Atrahasis obeyed, and the strategy worked. The plague ended. Humanity recovered and began multiplying again. The noise returned. Enlil, frustrated, tried again. This time he commanded the rain god to withhold rain, bringing drought and famine. For 6 years, the text tells us, the drought lasted. each year worse than the last. By the 6th year, humanity was on the brink of extinction, reduced to cannibalism, families consuming their own children to survive. The description is harrowing, unflinching in its depiction of suffering. Again Enki intervened, instructing the people to focus all worship on Adad, the storm god, to give him everything until he relented and sent rain. The strategy worked again. The rains came. Humanity survived and began, once more, to multiply. By this point, Enlil was beyond frustration. These half-measures were not working. Humanity was too resilient, too adaptable, and Enki was too clever, too protective of his creation. If humanity was to be eliminated, it would require something total, something even Enki could not circumvent. And so Enlil proposed the flood, a complete deluge that would cover the earth and drown every living thing, returning the world to the primordial waters from which it had emerged. The council of the great gods agreed. They swore a solemn oath that none of them would warn humanity. This oath was crucial because it bound even Enki, who could not directly violate such a sacred promise without catastrophic consequences to the divine order itself. But Enki, clever as always, found his loophole. He could not speak to a human, but he could speak to a wall, and if Atrahasis happened to be on the other side of that wall, if he happened to overhear, well, Enki could hardly be held responsible for that. And so Enki went to the reed house where Atrahasis lived, and he spoke to the wall. Reed house, wall, wall, he said, hear me and understand. Atrahasis, though I'm not speaking to you, you should know that the gods have decided to send a flood. You should perhaps consider building a boat, very large, sealed with pitch, with decks and compartments, and you should perhaps bring aboard your family and representatives of all animals. Not that I'm telling you to do this, you understand. I'm just talking to this wall about hypothetical boat-building techniques. The scene has a dark humour to it, divine bureaucracy finding a technical loophole, but it also reveals something important about Enki's character and role. He is the trickster god, the one who operates in the liminal spaces, who finds ways around impossible problems, who represents intelligence and adaptability in tension with law and order. He is humanity's patron not because he loves us in some sentimental way, but because we are his creation, his handiwork, and he takes pride in his craft. To destroy humanity would be to admit failure as a creator, and Enki's pride would not allow it. Atrahasis built the boat, exactly as Enki had described to the wall. He gathered his family, loaded animals and provisions, and sealed himself in. And then the flood came. The description of the flood is apocalyptic in scope and terror. The Anunnaki themselves sent it, Adad roaring in the clouds, Shulat and Hanish going before him, Erregal pulling up the mooring poles, Ninurta opening the dikes, the Anunnaki holding up torches setting the land ablaze with their brightness, and then the darkness, the silence, the stillness of death, and the water everywhere, rising, covering, drowning. For 7 days and 7 nights, the flood raged. The text tells us that not even the gods could see through the tempest. It was so fierce. And the gods, who had sent this destruction, were terrified by it. They cowered like dogs in the highest heaven, pressed against the walls of Anu's dwelling. The mother goddess, Nintu, wept and wailed, regretting her part in the creation that was now being destroyed. How could I have agreed to this? How could I have spoken for destruction in the assembly of the gods? My children, my creation, they fill the sea like fish. This is a remarkable moment of divine regret, of the creators mourning their creation. The gods, in their power and pride, had not fully understood what they were doing. They thought they were solving a problem, eliminating an annoyance, but when they saw the result, the total extinction of life, they were horrified by themselves, and they were hungry. This detail appears in multiple versions of the flood story and is crucial. The gods depended on humanity for their sustenance. The daily offerings at the temples, the sacrifices of bread and beer and meat, these fed the gods, sustained them in some way the myths never quite explain. With humanity gone, the gods had nothing to eat. They gathered around Anu, hungry, diminished, realizing too late that they had destroyed the very creatures upon whom they depended. When the waters finally receded and Atrahasis emerged from his boat and immediately offered sacrifice, burning meat and pouring out beer, the gods smelled the savour and gathered around like flies, desperate, grateful, ashamed. The text says they gathered around the offering like flies, which is almost pathetic. These supreme beings of the universe reduced to scrambling for food, like insects around carrion. Enlil arrived and was furious that anyone had survived. How did this happen? Who broke the oath? But the other gods turned on him. This was your idea, Enlil. You nearly destroyed us all with your foolish plan. How will we survive without humans to feed us? You did not think this through. Enki, of course, admitted his clever deception, and rather than being punished, he was vindicated. A new arrangement was made. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but with limitations designed to prevent the noise from becoming unbearable again. Some women would be barren, some children would die young, some would be carried off by demons. There would be death and suffering enough to keep the population in check, but not so much that humanity would be eliminated. And humans would be mortal, truly mortal now, with lifespans measured in decades rather than centuries or millennia. This compromise, this post-flood order, is the world as the Mesopotamians experienced it. A world of limitation and loss, where death is ever present, where suffering is common, where life is hard. But also a world where life continues, where humans and gods coexist in an uneasy but workable arrangement, where the cosmic order is maintained through mutual dependence. Your breathing has found its slowest rhythm now, deep and regular as the tide. The story washes over you, wave after wave of ancient wisdom, ancient sorrow, ancient acceptance. Let us turn now to another aspect of Anunnaki mythology, the question of divine kingship and the relationship between the gods and political power. In Mesopotamian thought, all legitimate authority came from the gods. Kings did not rule by their own strength or cunning alone, but by divine mandate, by the explicit choice of the Anunnaki to grant them kingship. This concept is expressed repeatedly in royal inscriptions, in hymns, in prayers. The standard formula begins with the king identifying himself and then immediately establishing his divine authorization. I am Hammurabi, the king chosen by the gods Anu and Enlil. I am Nebuchadnezzar, appointed by Marduk. I am Sargon, king of Akkad, favoured by Ishtar. The pattern is consistent across dynasties and centuries. What did this divine sanction mean in practical terms? It meant that the king served as the representative of the gods on earth, the intermediary between the divine and human realms. He was responsible for maintaining temples, ensuring proper worship, administering justice according to divine law, defending the land against enemies, and promoting prosperity. His success or failure was interpreted as a reflection of his relationship with the Anunnaki. Victory in battle meant the gods favoured him. Defeat meant he had somehow lost divine support. This system created a powerful ideological justification for royal authority, but it also placed constraints on that authority. A king could not simply do whatever he wished. He was accountable to the gods, and if he ruled unjustly, if he neglected the temples, if he oppressed the people too severely, the gods might withdraw their favour and raise up a challenger to replace him. The divine mandate could be revoked. We see this theology at work in numerous historical texts. When a city was conquered, the victors explained it not as a matter of superior military force alone, but as the defeated city's patron god abandoning them due to the king's failures and inviting the conqueror to come and restore proper order. When Babylon fell to the Persians in 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great issued a proclamation claiming that Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, had become angry with the Babylonian king Nabonidus for neglecting the proper rituals and had therefore chosen Cyrus to conquer Babylon and restore correct worship. This was probably propaganda, a way of legitimizing conquest by claiming divine sanction, but it was propaganda that only worked because it drew on deeply held beliefs about the relationship between gods, kings, and political order. The Mesopotamians genuinely believed that the Anunnaki controlled the destinies of nations, that they raised up rulers and cast them down according to their inscrutable will. The ritual life of kingship reflected this theology. The king participated in elaborate ceremonies designed to maintain his connection with the divine realm and to enact symbolically the cosmic order he was charged with maintaining. The most important of these was the New Year festival, which we mentioned earlier, but let us now explore it more deeply. The Akitu festival, as it was called in Babylonian times, took place in the spring month of Nisan, corresponding roughly to March or April in the modern calendar. It lasted 12 days, each day filled with specific rituals, processions, prayers, and dramatic reenactments. The entire city participated, but the king was the central figure, the one through whom the cosmic order would be renewed for another year. On the 4th day of the festival, the high priest recited the Enuma Elish, the entire creation epic, in the presence of Marduk's statue. This recitation was not entertainment, but a ritual act that, in the Mesopotamian understanding, actually renewed creation, reinforced the cosmic order, reminded both gods and humans of how the world came to be and how it must be maintained. The recitation took hours, every line chanted in the proper manner with the proper intonation, the words themselves carrying power. Then came one of the most remarkable rituals of the ancient world, the humiliation of the king. On the 5th day, the king entered the temple and approached the high priest. He was stripped of his royal regalia, his crown, his scepter, all the symbols of his authority. He knelt before the priest and made a negative confession, declaring that he had not sinned, had not neglected the city, had not struck anyone unjustly, had not humiliated anyone, had not desired evil. The king, the most powerful person in the realm, had to humble himself before the gods and account for his rule. The priest then struck the king on the cheek and pulled his ears, physically humiliating him. Then he returned the royal insignia and struck the king again, hard enough to bring tears to his eyes. If the king wept, it was a good omen, a sign that Marduk was pleased and would grant a good year. If no tears came, it boded ill. What are we to make of this ritual? On one level, it was a powerful assertion of divine authority over royal authority. Even the king, mighty as he was subject to the gods and their representatives. He could be stripped, struck, humiliated, and he had to accept it as right and proper. On another level, it was a symbolic death and rebirth. The king dying to his old year and being reborn, renewed, reinvested with power for the new year. The tears were perhaps tears of relief, of release, of the catharsis that comes from acknowledging one's limitations and receiving mercy anyway. After this humiliation, the king was reinvested with his regalia, and a great procession took place. The statue of Marduk was carried from the Esagila temple through the processional way to a special shrine outside the city, called the Bit Akitu, the house of the New Year festival. The king walked alongside or behind the statue, all of Babylon lining the route to watch, and when they reached the Bit Akitu, sacred rituals were performed reenacting Marduk's battle against Tiamat, his victory over chaos, his establishment of order. Scholars believe that this reenactment may have involved a ritual drama, with priests playing the roles of Marduk and Tiamat, acting out the cosmic battle. Some even suggest that a sacred marriage was performed, the king representing Marduk and a priestess representing Ishtar or another goddess, their ritual union ensuring fertility and prosperity for the land. The evidence for this is ambiguous, but the symbolism is powerful, the union of divine masculine and feminine principles generating the fruitfulness of the new year. Throughout the 12 days there were feasts, offerings, prayers, hymns, processions. The entire social order was on display, everyone from the king to the lowest slave participating in their proper roles. It was a moment when the normal rhythms of life were suspended, when the boundaries between human and divine were momentarily thinned, when the presence of the Anunnaki was especially palpable, when the world was made new again. And then it ended, and everyone returned to ordinary life, but they carried with them the assurance that the cosmic order had been renewed, that the gods were pleased, that the crops would grow, that the rivers would flood at the proper time, that civilization would continue for another year. Feel the weight of that assurance settling over you now, like a blanket, warm and heavy. The ritual is complete, the order is renewed, you can rest. But let us not rest yet. Let us explore further, for there are other texts, other stories, other aspects of the Anunnaki that we have not yet touched. Let us speak of Inanna, the great goddess, for she deserves special attention, being in many ways the most complex and fascinating of all the Anunnaki. Inanna, called Ishtar in Akkadian, was the goddess of love and war, fertility and destruction. The evening star and the morning star, Venus, in her dual aspect as harbinger of dusk and dawn. She was the goddess of contradictions, embodying both nurturing femininity and fierce martial power, both erotic allure and violent rage. She was beloved and feared in equal measure, the subject of some of the most beautiful poetry in the Sumerian corpus, and some of the most terrifying descriptions of divine wrath. The myths of Inanna are numerous, but but the most famous, the most profound, is the story of her descent to the underworld. This myth exists in multiple versions, Sumerian and Akkadian, with variations in detail, but a consistent core narrative. Inanna decides to descend to the underworld, to the realm of the dead, ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. Her motives are unclear, the text is ambiguous. Perhaps she wishes to extend her power into the one realm where she has no authority. Perhaps she goes to attend the funeral rites of the Bull of Heaven. Or perhaps she's simply drawn by that strange human, an apparently divine impulse to know what lies beyond death. Before she descends, Inanna prepares carefully. She adorns herself with all her divine regalia, 7 items in total, each representing an aspect of her power. She wears the crown of the steppe, the lapis lazuli beads around her neck, the twin egg stones on her breast, the breastplate called "Come Man, Come," the golden ring on her hand, the lapis measuring rod and line, and the pala dress, the royal robe. Fully arrayed in her power and glory, she approaches the gates of the underworld.